where we'll share with you the results from our survey on companies in the construction industry across Canada. So as I mentioned, I'm Rowan O'Grady. I'm the president of Hayes Canada. I've worked for Hayes for almost 20 years now, 8 of those based here in Toronto. My first 12 years actually with Hayes was in the construction division, so recruiting for permanent roles in that sector. So I have a real interest in what's happening in the industry still. I'm also joined on the call by Russell Carnley, who runs our construction recruitment business in Vancouver. Russell's based in Vancouver, and he's been with Hayes for 10 years, as well as Bob Racolenti, who leads our construction recruitment team in Toronto. Bob's been with Hayes for around 10 years also. So Russell and Bob are going to help any questions that we have to do with specific local market questions or ones that I might need a little bit of help with. So we'll keep you for approximately 25 minutes to share the results of the survey, and we'll have whatever time, 10, 15 minutes at the end for questions. So as I said, send in the questions as you think of them, or you can keep them until the end, and then we'll see if we can cover as many as we can at the end. So just a little bit about the survey before we start. As most of you know, we produce an annual salary guide which shows typical salaries paid across a section of industries and functional areas. It's cross-referenced for level of experience and type of company this role could be found in. Salaries are based on what we see every day in the roles that we fill and from the candidates that we meet. And it's really become an invaluable reference tool for literally thousands of hiring managers across the country. We're very proud of its simplicity and user-friendliness. So far, we've had approximately 1,000 requests, and we're in the pre-launch right now. We haven't really opened it out to the public yet, so it's being well received. If you haven't received a copy or you haven't requested one yet for the 2014 guide, just go to hayes.ca and you can easily request a copy there, and we will be in touch. In addition to the actual salary guide, we also survey our clients about their hiring plans. What are they going to do with salaries? Are they increasing or decreasing? What do they think, and what are their forecasts and business activity levels for the coming year? And also about their feelings towards confidence towards the economy in general. And this year, the survey was completed by over 3,000 hiring managers, HR professionals and business leaders across the country, across a range of industries. This year, for the first time, we've actually included 3 years of data to start showing some of the trends in the marketplace, which actually puts us into a position where we can actually see things that others can't, and also allows us to provide some really valuable advice and recommendations to our clients. Today's seminar or webinar, of course, is just about the construction industry, so we've pulled out the responses from 400 hiring managers, HR managers and leaders that are working specifically in the construction industry across Canada. So to just set a little bit of context on what's actually happening in the construction industry job market, I want to start with the skills shortage. Salary levels, like any monetary market, really are driven by supply and demand. So the skills shortage is the essential influencer on salary levels. And most employers are seeing the skills shortage having an influence. 47% are seeing a moderate shortage of skills, while 21% are seeing significant to extreme shortages. The majority of you believe this is driven by 2 key factors. Firstly, there's simply too few people entering the industry, and that brings up the question of how to make the construction industry more attractive to young people, and I know there's some work being done on this topic, but I think everybody feels there's a long way to go on that particular issue. Another element of the lack of people entering the construction market in Canada is to do with the challenges there are in bringing in people from overseas. There are candidates from other countries who would have suitable qualifications, background, experience, and they'd have the communication skills that we would need here. But a lot of our clients tell us that they still see the LMO process as being too onerous or too lengthy. And then you add into that the sense of responsibility that there is with the idea of, bringing someone and their entire family across the Atlantic, and a lot of companies seem to lose their appetite at that point. There is an element here of employers perhaps not trying hard enough to make that happen. And when you look at some other industries like oil and gas and mining, where they've got skill shortages and have for a number of years, they're actively bringing in international talent, and that's a very normal way of them working. We believe that that's going to become more and more normal for construction industry employers here in Canada in the next few years. Secondly, you've also got as many people thinking that skill shortage is being driven by a lack of training and professional development in the construction industry, which is kind of an interesting thing, because there's a lot of training and professional development courses available out there, but we believe the question is, are employers actively investing in having their future stars take part in courses that would move that person forward in their professional development? Are employers embracing new technologies that would advance their companies, and are they investing in having their people getting educated in these skills? And the other thought, which we'll come back to later on, is about career progression. So professional development as opposed to promotions. And just to ask that question, is there a culture in the construction industry of actively talking to mid-level employees about their own personal career plan, or is the attitude to have someone really carrying on in their current role indefinitely and offer progression only when someone actually retires? As I mentioned, we've been surveying our clients on the same questions for 3 years now. Hang on, I think I made a mistake there. For 3 years, and we can now share what the trends in the construction recruitment marketplace actually look like. I'll start out with the headlines on what we can see happening. Optimism, and this is good news, optimism amongst construction companies has reached a 3-year high. Business activity levels are falling short of forecasts. The salary levels have been increasing, but the level of the increase has actually declined, which I'll explain in a moment. So let me just talk through each of these, starting with the economy in general. We asked what people's view of the general economy was for the next 12 months, and here's the results according to managers and leaders in the construction industry. So the outlook for the Canadian economy for the next 12 months is positive. You've got over 50% of people saying that the economy would strengthen. That's the highest in 3 years, and there's been a corresponding drop in the number of people seeing things as weakening. A key point to note here is that there's now more people who believe that things will improve this year than believe it will remain the same for the first time in a few years. We seem to have crossed the line or turned the corner. For the general population, so this is all people who filled in the survey, that figure is still the other way around, so 40% believing that it's strengthening and 50% believing that it will remain the same. I think when that changes to a majority seeing it as improving, then we're going to see significant improvement in confidence levels in the economy across the country. So why is there a clear and consistent increase of confidence in the marketplace? Well, there's a few things. Number one, the reality for business leaders in construction the last couple of years has been conditions that could really best be described as being good. Maybe not great or excellent, depending on the sort of projects that you do or the size of company you are, or even where you're based, but overall the conditions have been good. There's really no substitute for the reality of a couple of solid years to start building confidence. Secondly, things are obviously getting a lot better in the US and in Europe, and there's good news coming from there. I know the World Bank announced yesterday that they thought that the world economy was at a turning point, and from a personal point of view, I feel far more confident saying 2014 could be the year that we really see things turn around. And thirdly, you combine Canada's stable economic performance over the last few years, and with the global upturn, you've got a pretty optimistic picture from people within this industry at least. So how about what people are seeing in their own organisations? Well, each year we ask people about expectation of business activity for the coming year and whether it's going to increase, decrease or stay the same. We also ask them what happened in the year just gone, so we can now compare their expectations for any particular year with what actually happened in that year. So the first point to make here is that the construction industry in Canada has seen a few very positive years. At least 50% of companies each year report increases in business activity levels. That's been driven by a lot of things. The high-rise construction and development work going on in most of the major cities, and large infrastructure projects happening, such as water treatment plants in Ontario, or a lot of hospital projects happening in Ontario. You've got things like the Portman Bridge between Vancouver and Surrey, or the Evergreen Line in Vancouver. Or even something like the 40 P3 school projects that have happened in Alberta over the last 3 years. So lots of good things happening. You add into that that there's a reducing number of companies seeing things getting slower, and it's a good time for the industry in general. But just on this particular graphic, there's a couple of interesting things to highlight though. It would appear that there's a significant and growing level of over-optimism on expected business levels each year. So, for example, in 2012, we had 60% of people expecting increases in business activity levels in their company. And when we asked how the year had actually gone for them a year later, just over 50% saw an increase, and that's a 10-point difference. Like, generally speaking, I think that people tend to be optimistic, and they always feel, well, next year is going to be even better for us, which is a great thing. Hope springs eternal. So you would expect that reality frequently doesn't really match up with expectation in life. But having said that, that doesn't really account for the fact that the gap is actually getting wider each year. So for 3 years now, you can see that the expectation for improvement has become more widely accepted. And at the same time, there's a smaller number of companies reporting an increase in activity at the end of the year. But the good news is that's not being driven by more companies seeing activity decrease. If anything, there are less companies seeing activity decrease each year, but there's certainly more companies reporting a static state in activity levels. So you can see in 2011, around 25% of companies saw a static state compared to the previous year, but that then increased to 35% in 2013. So why are there less companies growing, and at exactly the same time, optimism is increasing? Our view on it is, you've got a lot of companies in the industry right now that are busy, but margins in the construction industry are very, very tight, and that causes a conundrum for some business leaders in the industry that they're faced with, i.e. there are opportunities available, but do I really want to stretch the company a little bit further? Is the return on the investment actually...
I think the noise told that one.
Somebody's not muted there. With margins very, very tight, the answer to that could be like really just to hold fire, and perhaps that's what we're seeing. So companies without the confidence to take on extra projects and stretch the company more because the margins are very, very tight. Having said that, the news coming from the US in the last year and from Europe more recently would make you think that 2014 really could be the year that we see the confidence coming back, and that could be good news for everybody. And based on the fact that we're seeing more companies in the industry starting to plateau on activity levels, that could be really well-timed news. If that does happen and margins do become more attractive and we start seeing profit levels increase for companies, we will see companies starting to take more risks and starting to grow more rapidly. If the global recovery doesn't happen, we could see the proportion of companies reporting increases in activity levels drop to below 50% for the first time in the last few years. So what effect is all of this having on hiring plans? So we asked what the intention is on managing permanent headcount, and we've put that alongside what actually happened in retrospect for each year, plus we also have the 2014 plans. Just a couple of things to highlight here. From a positive point of view, there's around 40 to 50% of companies increasing headcount for the last 2 years. They're planning on doing the same again this year, and that's obviously as a result of the good conditions that we've seen. However, there is a kind of more cautionary trend here as well. So in 2012 and 13, we saw the same thing happening, and that is a significantly higher proportion of companies reducing headcount than expecting it at the start of the year. So what's happening here? Our view is it's linked to the previous slides where we can see more companies holding steady on activity levels. And when companies are holding firm on activity levels, what we see them frequently doing is actually reducing headcount to try and improve their productivity and profitability, and that would match up with what we saw in the previous slides. So a typical example that we would see frequently would be, say, a project manager on a $20 million project. He could be doing his own contract administration, change orders, RFIs, without the assistance of a project coordinator, whereas previously he would have had that kind of assistance. And just as an aside, which kind of backs up this point, we've clearly seen the project coordinators and assistant supers probably being the hardest hit for job opportunities over the last couple of years. So it would appear that there's a fair proportion of companies out there looking to get more out of the people that they have in an effort to drive productivity and profitability, and there's a cost to that, of course, too. Looking forward to 2014, expected salary or staff levels are almost identical to 2013 expectations, so we'll have to wait and see how 2014 actually turns out. How is all of this affecting salary levels? We ask each year how much salary levels were increased by in the previous year, so we've shown that from 2011, along with what the plans are for 2014. There's clear movement here of more companies offering increases below 3% mark, and a reduction in companies offering over the 3% mark. So why is that happening? Our view is that it's a result of what we've been seeing in the previous slides, general optimism about the economy and about the future business for your own companies, but then tempered with the reality that margins are very tight indeed and activity levels for some companies are plateauing. There is a sobering effect going on, and we can see that coming through in a more conservative approach to annual salary reviews. So that's the 3-year trends. If I look then forward at 2014, how does the recruitment market for construction professionals look in 2014? So just starting with activity levels, and we can break this into the different regions. We asked whether business activity levels for 2014 would increase, decrease, or remain the same. We've got 65% of companies in the industry say that they would expect that business levels will increase, and 28% saying it will remain the same. Regionally, that looks like 61% expecting an increase in Ontario, 65% in BC, 76% of companies in Alberta expecting to see business activity levels increase, which isn't really that surprising that Alberta is going better, but overall a positive view. What effect would that have on hiring? Well, we asked about staff levels and whether the plan was to increase headcount, decrease it or keep the same. 49% are planning on increasing, 42% planning on staying the same. So when you think that 65% of companies were expecting business activity levels to increase, you've got almost a 20-point difference there of companies hoping that they're going to improve productivity. And it's the same pattern regionally when you look through it. So Ontario, 43% of companies planning on increasing staff levels, BC at 48%, and Alberta again leading the way at 56%. We asked employers then what they felt would be the biggest challenges that they would face for recruitment in 2014. You can see here 35% saying that the fundamental skill shortage would be the real challenge, and almost 30% seeing the lack of new people entering the market as the challenge. An interesting point here, just to contrast the construction industry with some other industries, an interesting point here is that 10% of people are starting to think about things like the internal resources they have available to source new people, same proportion thinking about their own company's reputation in the marketplace, like are they well known as an employer, do they have people coming to them applying for opportunities. And if you look at industries where the skill shortage is seen as more extreme, like information technology or oil and gas, things like company profile in the market, internal resources, they're scoring at like 30 to 40%. So that could be ahead for the construction industry as the skill shortage continues. We get asked every year which roles are going to be the most in demand. Why is that? Like what's causing it? And then what effect that will have on the salaries for people in these roles or with these kind of skill sets. So we've picked a few out here. The most in demand roles that we've seen in 2013, and we predict it will remain largely the same for 2014, would be some of the following ones. So project managers with retail experience, particularly in Western Canada it would appear, being driven by US retailers coming into the Canadian market, and then the knock-on effect that has with local retailers and construction work that they would start embarking upon. Design build project managers and estimators are really in demand, and that's being driven by the attraction for a lot of companies into the design build market versus operating in the competitive bid for the competitive bid opportunities and the low margins that are available there. So being able to bring in that expertise is very attractive. High-rise supers, very high demand due to the growing high-rise markets in Toronto and in Vancouver, but also now that we actually have a high-rise market in Edmonton and Calgary, so virtually new markets there, that's putting even more pressure on trying to find people with those skill sets. Overall, we'd expect that the average salaries with people with strong experience in those areas would increase by 5 to 10% this year, as opposed to more of the industry norm around plus or minus on 3%. Just an important point, excuse me, an important point to make here is that the increase could be driven by changes that are happening at the existing employer, so an individual going through an annual salary review. But that number is also being driven up by some of these individuals actually moving jobs and then seeing a very significant increase in their salary when they actually do that. We asked what the plans were for salary changes in 2014, and I can show you this and break it down regionally. So 47% of companies in Canada are planning on offering increases of less than 3%. 40% are planning on increases of between 3 and 6%, so positive movement there in salaries in general. Regionally, there are some differences, and largely it's following the pattern we saw in business activity and hiring plans. So in Ontario, we've got the majority offering increases of less than 3%. BC, they're at 50%, or 50% of companies offering less than 3, and almost 40% offering between 3 and 6. And Alberta is the most aggressive, as you may expect, with close to 60% offering increases of 3 to 6%, and 30% of employers offering less than a 3% increase. When it comes to non-monetary benefits, we asked some questions about what was having the biggest impact on recruitment and retention, and also what the plans were for next year, whether people were planning on making any changes. Just wanted to share this with you too, to help our clients build a more compelling offer when they're going out recruiting. We asked how much of an impact a selection of benefits would have on recruitment and retention, and the top two coming through were career growth and vacation time. We put career growth in here because it's a non-monetary benefit, and it plays a large role in attracting and retaining staff. So we put it in here, and it's come through as the number one thing. Career growth, and I would define that as not always a promotion. It could be professional development, advancement, learning new things, coming across new challenges. But career growth is one that has increased in importance levels over the last few years. We think that's really got a lot to do with people's appetite for progression increasing as the recovery has taken place. In any event, top two were vacation and career progression, and the others that are topical, such as things like work from home that you hear a lot of talk about, being seen as of neutral impact, which is interesting. We also asked which benefits employers wanted to add to the package, and flexible work options like flexi hours came out on top, followed by performance-related bonus and RSP matching. So a combination there of kind of maybe something that might be connected to a work-life balance, and then two more closely to monetary compensation. I just wanted to make a quick point kind of on this topic. We conducted another survey, a completely separate survey about, I think it was 4 or 5 months ago, and it was targeted at professional skilled people, asking them how they evaluate an offer of employment from a new employer, and then how they rate the component parts, which things are more important to them, how much weight do they give them. That report was called What People Want, and if you want to get a copy of that, go on to hayes.ca, you can request a copy there. It's really insightful, actually. But anyway, we asked people to rate different elements of benefits in order of importance within this survey, and vacation time came out as clearly more important than flexible work options. And the point we made in that paper was just to say to employers, look, consider the impact that focusing on increasing time off would have over flexible work options, which seems to be just a popular thing to talk about almost, and the effect that that might have on people's feelings towards the work-life balance. Finally, one other point to share, or one other insight, just looking at that graphic about benefits that impact recruitment and retention again on the left, career growth is clearly very important to people, and employers are aware of the impact that that can have on recruitment and retention. So we asked whether they had a succession plan in place, and it turned out actually the majority do not. So 38% do, and the rest either don't, they're unsure whether they do or they don't, which may mean that they don't, or they're starting to, they're just in the process of implementing it. But I recall that was very similar to what it was last year. So it appeared that, generally speaking, 60% of companies actually don't have that. So there's a big opportunity for companies there to effect a very positive change with their team without really incurring an additional cost. And from what we can see every day, companies specifically in the construction industry are not nearly as proactive in talking to their middle-level people about career plans and about their professional development as you would find in other industries. So we would say, think about the impact you could have on recruitment and retention if you could actually hold your succession plan in your hand and physically show people what the plan is for the next 5 to 10 years, where they could personally fit in, and also what they need to do to make sure that that actually happens. Finally, and before we see if we have any questions, just have a couple of basic recommendations on how to stay competitive in the market and how to ensure that when you're offering people that you're building a compelling offer. So just a few thoughts here. Uniform increases of salaries might not actually respond to the level of shortage for certain roles. It might be too much for some roles, it might be too little for others. So I would say think about which roles are the most in demand or hard to find and respond accordingly. Think about people in your own organisation that have these skill sets and review their salary in a different context. If the hopes for the economy in general come true, and this really is the year that there's a global turnaround, we could be in store for even more growth for companies in the construction sector in the next couple of years. And if that happens, there will be a change similar to what's already happened in Alberta. So you'll see a shift back to salary increases, annual salary increases over 3%. And moving along with that is an essential thing to remain competitive, but there is a note of caution, I would say, and that is to bear in mind that only one company actually pays the most, or in other words, there's always somebody paying more, so you cannot and you should not try and compete on salary alone. We can tell you that there's a clear appetite amongst employees to trade basic salary for other things like performance-related bonus, like increased vacation time, like better career opportunities, like new challenges. So I would suggest perhaps trying something different and see what sort of impact it makes. Finally, think about what your offer, or what differentiates your offer, and whether that actually appeals to the kind of people that you're trying to target. Play the cards that most appeal to people that you want to attract. So for example, how about creating your company's succession plan and then sharing it with your own team, but also with prospective employees to show where the gaps will be. It's the #1 thing that influences recruitment and retention, so that's got to be a good idea. Or how about talking about professional development with future stars as opposed to only talking about it when potentially there's a promotion on the cards or when somebody's about to retire. So that is the end of the presentation of the results. I think I almost exactly kept within the time. So I really hope you found the information there useful and it can be of help to you for 2014. We'll have a look now to see if we've got any questions, and before I do that, just to remind you to request your own copy of the salary guide. Just go to hayes.ca/salary guide and we'll be in touch with you straight away. And thank you very much for listening so far. So we've got, I'm also available for questions. Remember, we have Russell Carnley, who's out in Western Canada. He's based in Vancouver. Bob Bracklenti, who works in this area for us in Toronto. So let's see how we're doing. Let's read these out as we go. So do you have salary increase data for Alberta only? Yes, and I just showed that. So sorry to ask a question that I already answered. Can we get a copy of the presentation after the session? Yes, you can. We've recorded the WebEx and we're going to post it online on hayes.ca. So you'll see the slides will be online, so anybody can go in and look at them. And if you feel like it, you could listen to the audio again. If somebody wants to listen to that, or you can pass it on, they can actually re-listen to the WebEx. So yes, that's completely available. Will you be posting the presentation? I'll say yes. Lots of people asking for the presentation. I'll just hold on to see if there's any other questions. Okay, it's saying here, how do Ontario growth margins compare to the rest of Canada? So I would suspect that's one I'm going to have to get Bob and Russell to talk about. So Bob and Russell, and maybe you don't know about each other's areas, but is it possible to talk about growth margins in the construction industry that you can see in Toronto versus Vancouver?
Sure. Growth margins in terms of headcount, I think companies are still going to be conservative. Growth margins in terms of profit, I think as the demand, we've had such a steady economy for the last couple of years that now we're starting to see a little bit of an increase in profitability on some of the projects, and that should drive companies to extend themselves a little bit further. So ballpark, you might go from, like now we're in the 1% to 2% on certain projects. It should grow beyond that in the next year or two.
Okay, and Russell, any difference to that in Vancouver?
Pretty similar, actually. We still haven't reached that tipping point where margins are sort of so attractive to really encourage people to grow in a rapid sort of way, which obviously Alberta was the first to see in this recent period. So I think we may see that this year. And when that does happen, that's when we tend to see candidates receiving sort of multiple competing job offers and that sort of thing, and that's when we know we're entering sort of an overheated recruitment marketplace. So when that happens, we'll see salaries increase quite rapidly, but I don't think we're quite there yet. Perhaps this summer, once all the projects get into the ground that are anticipated, then we could be in position to see some quite marked change.
Yeah, like the one observation I would have is where you see there's a little bit more confidence about growing and there's a little bit more confidence about increasing salaries, that would lead me to believe there's marginally less pressure in Vancouver on margins than there is in Toronto, and obviously then there's significantly less pressure on margins in Alberta than there is in both, actually. So hopefully that answers that question. Next question actually might be one that Thea, our marketing director, can answer. So the question is architecture a subset of this construction industry information that you're presenting? And I believe that architecture actually is a subsection, because people would have said, what industry do you work in? I think the option was construction. Thea, could you just confirm that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
It's
now, in the salary guide, there is a completely separate architecture section where you can see what's happening with salaries within the architecture industry. So whoever asked that question, or anybody in architecture, I'd suggest you have a look at the guide and go to the architecture section. And the same point goes for engineering, mechanical and electrical contracting, mechanical and electrical consulting engineering, and civil and structural engineering as well. And that's all in the guide. Here's a great question. Will Hayes be assisting with methods of recruiting international employees? Yes, like we do a lot of this, actually. I've been involved in a lot of projects over the years of moving professionals from one country to another. We have businesses in 30 different countries around the world, and construction and property is our #1 specialization everywhere. We've been in that business since the 1950s. We're market leaders in the UK, in Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, so countries that you would really hope to get candidates from, generally speaking, from what we hear from our clients. So absolutely, so if there's an interest in assistance with that, and we do a lot of work with companies in Canada already, helping them recruit candidates from those countries, get in touch with me. My email address is rowan.o'grady with no apostrophe @hayes.com, or you can email the marketing email address that's there on the screen. Let's see, is there information regarding, is there any information regarding residential construction only in the salary guide? Bob and Russell? I don't think there is. I think it's for, actually,
yeah, there is a salary section.
Within the salary section there is, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a residential construction section which refers to essentially non-high-rise residential, and then there's a section split out that refers to high-rise itself.
Excellent.
One thing I would suggest, though, is if you have a specific question or position, we can always make the time, because there's a lot of factors that go in, but a quick phone call to Russell or I, and we can give you a really good idea of what you would be looking for in your instance for that specific role in terms of salary.
Right. Page 45 and 46, I'm told, in the salary guide for residential construction, so that's good. Let's see, is there anything else? I don't think there is anything else for now. So that's it. Thank you very, very much for your time. We really appreciate it. We've had a fantastic attendance for the call today, so I think we're going to make it an annual event. As I said, if you have any questions, please get in touch with us and we can do whatever we can. And if that's helping you with just advice or guidance on what to do and not just simply recruitment, more than happy to do that too. So thank you very much, and best of luck for 2014.